Welcome, everybody. I'm Dr. Stephen Long, and this is the X Factor, the podcast for leaders by leaders. Today, I'm joined with Ben Levin of Level Equity in New York. Hi, Ben. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Well, great. Why don't you tell me who you are and what you do?
Will do. Thanks for having me. Ben Levin, I'm one of the co-founders and one of the co-managers of Level Equity, which is a growth equity fund. Personal background, I'm a native New Yorker. I was born in Manhattan in 1972. So I'm starting to show my age. I moved out of the city when I was quite young. I grew up in very rural Massachusetts. My parents moved to Massachusetts for a year in 1976, and they're still up there. So I grew up there. I went away to school when I was quite young. I went away to a boarding school and then off to college. And I returned to Manhattan after college for what has been an entire career in financial services. So my first job out of college, I did a 2-year internship, kind of a classic investment banking internship at Salomon Brothers when it was Salomon Brothers. I took a little bit of time off after that. I spent about 10 months pursuing a personal passion, and then I've been working in private equity ever since. For the first 4.5 years of my private equity career, I worked for a wealthy family office that had a diversified set of business activities. I worked in what you'd characterize today as like a lower middle market investment buyout business, a growth buyout business focused on industrial and basic industry businesses. I was an associate and a vice president doing analytical deal support and helping source and execute tuck-in acquisitions for an injection molder mostly and an aerospace and defense business. I did that for about 4.5 years. That family took their real estate business public, and the business I worked in was sold off. The assets were sold off, and I joined then medium-sized, now very large growth equity firm, where I stayed for a little under 7 years until I founded Level with 2 other folks in 2009. And Level Equity is a growth equity firm. We focus on investing in rapid growth, mostly bootstrapped, software and other technology businesses that we identify primarily by cold calling. It's an investment paradigm and investment methodology that has been around for several decades, but we left to found the firm to focus on the lower end of that, so that generally sub $50 million check size in these rapid growth software and other technology businesses.
Okay. Well, it's always great to speak with a fellow New Yorker, Ben. So what is the best aspect of being a leader?
There's a lot of kind of amazing things that being a leader opens up. So for me, you're able to set direction. For me, it's been an ability to be really authentic, to become a really authentic version of myself, create an environment. People found businesses for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons we founded Level was we wanted to create an awesome culture. And so trying to create an environment where people can do really good things, where people can be the best versions of themselves, trying to create an environment where performance, you can get real performance out of people, and people can build careers, they can build families, they can build lives. Being able to set direction is obviously super flattering. It's a luxury, but it's one of the appealing aspects of being a leader, as is, I think, the almost perfect accountability. When you're a leader or a co-leader, involved in leadership positions, I think it's harder to delude yourself if things aren't working, that it's anybody's fault other than yourselves. And I think that's a very positive dynamic. It's challenging, it creates accountability, it creates, for me, it's created desire to perform. There's kind of no layer of obfuscation or any ability to kind of hide from results. And I think that's super appealing.
Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned something about right in the beginning of answering the question about setting direction, but also setting direction for the company, and I assume that has really has to do with culture, because you mentioned that not only just creating a business, but creating lives. And I'm wondering what were some of the effects of that, because I think that's a more of a broad scale approach than most businesses take.
So I think it's a great question, and I think they're setting direction in terms of business direction. What types of investments are we going to make? What sectors are we going to focus on? But I'll try and answer the question on the cultural piece. We started with the perspective that we wanted to build a great culture, but I think one of the things we found out over the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years is cultures are interesting and they grow on their own. And so when we first started the business, there were 3 of us. We knew each other very well. we hired 2 people directly out of undergrad, and kind of 3 people that know each other very well and 2 people that have a first job. Doesn't a culture create? And so over time, as the firm got larger, as we got more diverse, you started to see a culture develop on its own. But I think I've always thought the hallmarks of culture are a couple of things. One, the ability to succeed, like there being growth is, I think, intoxicating, and it really brings out the best in people, the ability to grow further in their career. I think transparency, understanding what the relevant components of success are. How do you get from where you are to where you want to get to? And I think that's an area where lots of businesses don't perform perfectly. It's hard to figure out what you need to do. And then, like the most basic of all, do the folks that work together genuinely respect and like each other? And that doesn't mean everybody needs to be the same or have the same interests, but a mutual respect. It's super fun, and I think inspirational, aspirational to work with really intelligent people, but to genuinely enjoy spending time with them. So, we've joked historically and internally about the plane test. You want to sit on a plane for 6 hours next to one of your coworkers. If the answer is no, you have a cultural problem. If the answer is always yes, you probably have a culture that at least is headed in the right direction.
That's a great answer. So, what do you see as the primary responsibility of being a leader?
Again, I'll split it into, there's a mission. We're an investment firm. We raise money for endowments and for pensions and invest on their behalf. So our business mission is to create great returns for them. And generally, you are trying to satisfy all the different constituents. Mm-hmm. More broadly, you shape culture, you shape business direction, you decide and help influence areas of focus. You want to be able to make decisions. I think it's very important as a leader to be able to make decisions. You want to be thoughtful, but you also want to be able to make quick decisions. It's often required in business, but I also think it's very challenging when you're not a leader to look to someone and try and get a decision and not be able to get a decision. The lack of a decision sometimes is a decision. So I think the ability to make decisions in dynamic environments, I think you have to lead by example. I think if you want people to work hard, you have to work hard. If you want people to care, you have to care. I think you want to, and I alluded to this under the cultural question. It sounds cheesy, but I really think it's true, and it's at the heart of how we think about hiring and bringing people in. You want to create environments where people can be the best version of themselves. So you want to draw out the best version of a person, enable them. And that's a combination of giving, and it's different for each person, giving them direction, giving them the freedom to experiment, but you want to create an environment that fosters that. And then, as I alluded to, you want to represent your constituents. You want to represent your investors. You want to represent your employees. You want to represent, in our case, our investments. We invest in a number of small businesses. You want to help them. You want to live up to the mission, the reason that they took capital from you. So there's a lot of different folks that you serve in any leadership capacity. And I think those are the types of things that I think are, or at least I try and embed in the way I think about it in my role.
That's a great response. You mentioned, and you didn't go into detail about it. That's why I want to follow up with it. But you talked about how people will work side by side, leader and follower. And I think it's something that a lot of leaders miss a little, miss the boat on, is that they fail to provide that role model. That when followers see the leader, rolling up the sleeves and doing the hard work and willing to get right into the trenches, with them, that goes a long way. And it really goes into what's called social learning theory, is what the role model is, or who the role model is, and what they're doing, and what you're actually, what the followers are actually seeing from the behavior of the leader. I think that's
super important across both kind of core primary business functions and just attitudinal, meaning I think it's tough to work for people that think they're too good to do anything. And so whether that's literally putting the dishes away, cleaning the office, being the first person in, the last person out, being respectful to any constituent that you interact with, being a good person, not just a good employee, but a good person. And then I do think from a role perspective, I've worked for people who were exceptionally capable, and when they asked you to do something, they could do it more quickly and more effectively from when they used to do it. And I think that's, again, inspiring, aspiring, and it tends to eliminate a little bit of that hierarchical feel where someone's asking you to do something that they either wouldn't or couldn't do. So I do think, and again, that contradicts another kind of hallmark of being a good leader, which is hiring people that are ultimately smarter and more talented than you are, and can do things that you could do probably better. So there's a dynamic there where you want to make sure that people understand that you're not too good for anything. You should, could, and would do any of it, but you're also trying to optimize by hiring people that are better at some of those functional roles than maybe you were when you were there. And I think, this is not self-deprecating. I think in many of the businesses, certainly the one I'm in today, that is 100% true. The young, talented, up-and-coming folks are generally a lot better at a lot of the tactical stuff than any of us were when we were young.
Interesting. Well, that brings me to my next question is, what advice would you give to other leaders regarding human performance?
So human performance is almost a topic on its own. So like, how do you get the best out of, I think you have to start with yourself. Like, how do you get the best out of yourself? And that really, if you get the best out of yourself, you're going to get the best out of yourself, not just in the work component of your life, but you're going to get the best out of yourself in all the other things that you do, whether you're a father, a brother, a sister, a coworker, and an athlete. And so I think there's a lot of things that I do or experiment with, from, wearing devices that measure, how you're doing on your steps and your heart rate and your heart rate variability, to experimenting with diet and nutrition and exercise and sleep and meditation and coaching and cognitive behavioral therapy and float tanks and visualization and breathing. And there's so many things you can do to just enhance the way you physically perform and mentally perform as a human, almost all of which accrue to your job performance. If you calm your anxieties, if you're getting good sleep, if you're well rested, well hydrated, following great nutrition protocol, has a huge impact on your performance, not just physically, but also mentally in the office. So I would give people, humans, and certainly leaders, the advice to take care of yourself first, because it's much easier to be good at almost anything if you're doing a good job of taking care of yourself. Specifically, I would say developing empathy is a very important thing in being a leader. It's very hard to effectively lead people if you can't understand where they're coming from. People are very different. Both people laterally and below and above you are very different. So understanding that human drive and where people are coming from, trying to be, honest to a fault, super transparent, authentic. I'm a big believer in that people can respond to tough data. People want they want the truth. They want to understand how things work. They're not always going to hear exactly what they want, but it's better than painting a mirage of something that's not realistic. And so those would be big chunks of the advice. As it relates to the human performance piece, I think experimentation. Everybody's different. Some people respond great to, to certain modalities. Some people don't, but trying a lot of different things over a long period of times and really tracking as to what's working, what's enhancing your ability to, to get a lot out of yourself, again, in the business context or in other contexts to your life.
Well, what you mentioned there, and you pointed to your watch. I got a watch, but as just opposed to maybe just 10 years ago, I think leaders are much more receptive to data regarding human performance. I think they're becoming just more aware of the underpinnings that people have that that actually spur their performance. And obviously, I'm in the as a psychologist, I'm really looking at beliefs and attitudes, and I can measure all that stuff. But I'm wondering, what have you found that's really been just integral as far as, like when you said, when people are really receptive to the data? What data are they receptive to, and they're actually excited to see something about themselves and how it can help them perform better?
So it's actually a hard question, and I probably personalize it in terms of the data that I track. But I think broadly, people enjoy personality assessment. I think people enjoy understanding. There's a lot of different ones. There's some classic ones like, introversion versus extroversion, Myers-Briggs. I've rarely gone through an exercise like that, either myself or with other people, and not had them take note and say, that's interesting. Maybe that's why I am the way I am, or now I understand why I react to certain situations. So that's probably a broad, very business specific or business applicable. I think giving people feedback on how they're being perceived, I think one of the biggest challenges for people in general, and certainly for everything from the most junior employee up to a leader, is kind of blind spot identification. It's easy to fix the things you know about. It's really hard to fix the things you don't know about. And so if people won't tell you what you're doing wrong or how you're being misperceived, it's very hard to adjust. I've had a career coach for 19 years. That's been super helpful. Tactically, as you mentioned, there's just stuff available today that wasn't available 5-10 years ago. You can track your heart rate variability. You can track your sleep and your quality of sleep and your REM sleep. You can track your heart rate. And with those three things, this device, a Whoop, will give you a recovery score, but you can give yourself a pretty good assessment based on how much sleep you're getting, the quality of that sleep, where your heart rate variability is, how you're responding to stress, and you can adjust. It's very hard to adjust. I am not one of those humans who can do well with little sleep, but for much longer than I care to admit, I told myself I was. I said, I'm one of the small percentage of the population that only needs 4 hours. It was like an ego thing. I'm one of those. I'm not. There's 1% of the population. I'm not one of them. But for decades, I didn't get enough sleep, and it probably had a really meaningful impact on my performance. And back then, you just didn't have a very visible output. Had you been wearing one of these, it would have said your recovery's terrible, your heart rate variability is real low, and your heart rate's spiking, which if you're an athlete or if you're just trying to perform well in a business context are very negative indicators on your likelihood of success. So I think I respond really well to hard data. I also have a slightly obsessive compulsive brain. And so if you give me something to track, I will have a hard time not tracking it. So again, different people respond to different things. You got to find the things that people respond to and try and get them the data that can make those things actionable for them.
Yeah, as a data hog myself, I'm in full agreement with you there. Just give me the number and I'll be able to figure it out. But you mentioned something earlier about empathy, and one of the things I've learned is that personality theories and evaluations can be a great tool to develop empathy, because not only can it create self-awareness within yourself as far as what your tendencies are, but once you have a greater understanding and a greater self-awareness of who you are, then through personality assessments, you can figure out how other people are and what their preferences, tendencies, and communication styles are. And so from that point of view, it becomes less of an emotionally based way to teach empathy, even though it is an emotional skill, but you can teach it through a cognitive approach, which I find that a lot of people are very receptive to.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because I think before you go through an exercise like that and someone says, hey, you're a wild extrovert, you just think that's how everybody is until you're presented with a spectrum, or you're reasonably introverted and you say, okay, well, that's why at the end of the day, I get really tired and I want to spend some time alone. So I think you're right. Being exposed to this spectrum, I've seen different office environments there's like a color test, whether are you blue, you yellow, or you red. And I've known, we haven't done it here. We've done those tests, but people have put those things up on their door. And so you walk by someone's office and you're like, okay, that's an introvert with a yellow personality. They're going to be friendly, but they might not want to get bothered all the time. So I think you're totally right. I think those exercises are very helpful, because you realize that where am I? But you also realize there's lots of other places on that spectrum. And so you have to bear that in mind.
That's great. So who were your role models, your leadership role models, and what did you learn from them?
So that's a really hard question for me, because I don't feel like I had any one. I feel like, I worked at Salomon Brothers in the mid-90s. It was like a cowboy culture. I've worked at a family office that had a very dynamic environment. And so I don't have one or two people where I say I wanted to be like Jim or I wanted to be like Sally. And, they're the aspirational leadership type. I also think humans learn better through negative feedback than positive feedback. So I think you learn a lot more about who you want to be from seeing things that you don't want, as opposed to or at least I have. So I've been super lucky that I've had a number of different job experiences. Like I've been at a number of different firms, and I've had the benefit of working with a ton of really intelligent people. But I've also worked with people that were difficult and challenging and not great leaders. So across the spectrum, I will tell you, I think my morals, my values, my desire, how I want to be, were much more informed reacting against things as opposed to reacting for things. But it's kind of a panetta of, you get exposed to a lot of stuff, and this can be micro. This can be like, how do you sell? How do you manage conflict? And you'll see somebody yell at people and you'll say, I don't like that. And you'll see someone do it in a very human fashion. You say, oh, I like that. So it's like a double example. And I think that's across most of the, to the extent I've developed any leadership capabilities, it's been that combination of picking different people in my life, both professionally and non, who are doing things that you think are interesting, or doing things that violate your sense of what you think is the right way to do stuff, and reacting accordingly. So it's been a really interesting combination. I've been asked that question, and I've heard people talk about people that work for one woman or one man and they shaped everything. I did not have that experience. It was not one person.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because it goes back again to the concept of social learning theory and role models. Is that just the fact that there are negative role models?
100%.
Is that no, I don't want to do it like him or her. And that can have as profound an impact on your leadership behavior as any positive role model. And it's and this is a really important point for particularly for the younger people, is that they may be stuck with a bad boss. Is that okay? If you're stuck with a bad boss, then learn from that boss about how not to be a boss, about the things, and then try to figure out, how did that person get to that position. Right? And why are they like that? And then try to protect themselves as they manage their career, as they grow older and wiser, as far as what you don't want to be like, in order to enhance human performance. That's really, that's really what it comes down to.
I really agree with that.
Yeah. So, all right. So how do you relax? How do you celebrate?
So this is, I both don't think I do a good job at either one of those things, and I've been told I do a poor job at both of those things. So I'll give you answers, both good and bad. I think a lot of times I take like an easy way, which is I'll go out and eat and drink a bunch and celebrate that way. And I had a funny post earlier this summer. I'd taken 10 weeks of a really clean diet and not drinking, and I had a drink, and I posted celebrating good behavior with bad behavior. So sometimes I think I make the wrong choice. It's like you just want to do something to relax. What do I love to do? What relaxes me? I'm a big fitness fan. I do a little bit of martial arts, or I did a little bit of martial arts before COVID. I have young kids, love spending time with my family. I love driving. I just took a big driving vacation. So I like active relaxation. I have increasingly, the older I get, a relatively hard time with passive relaxation. When I was younger, I could go to the beach for a week and relax. I find myself now, that lasts a day or two, and I get a little stir crazy. So active relaxation is better for me than passive.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. It's particularly like going for a drive, or going for some kind of escape. Is that I'm finding people are turning away from what you said is the indulgent things like eating and drinking, and moving more towards to what's called a delayed gratification reward. Is that something that they really enjoy doing, but they won't do it until they achieve something. So maybe they're avid fishermen, whether deep sea fishing or fly fishing. Or I had one person tell me that what they really love to do is scuba diving, and they won't take that scuba diving trip until a project is completed.
Right.
So I think what you're talking about is that delayed gratification thing, where you experience something, and where it's just not a momentary thing, but it's something that you can draw upon and will actually refuel you for the next project.
Yeah, I think life is full of a huge number of paradoxes, and there's a lot of mirages out there. I think the short, quick, celebratory eating, drinking tends not to be very rewarding. You don't feel great after doing it. And some of the most gratifying things in the world are the things that are the hardest to do. So, it's a cheesy old quote, but I think it's kind of more about the journey than the destination. I've always found destinations very anticlimactic, whatever they are. The process of doing a thing is usually much more interesting, even if challenging, and much more constitution building than doing something that's short and kind of appears to be fun.
And that's a great signpost for human performance in general. It's really it's all about the process.
Yeah, there's no end.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, listen, I was flattered to have the opportunity to chat. These are things I love talking about. I think I said this in the conversation you and I had. I didn't start the world thinking I was going to be a co-leader or leader of anything. So I take the obligation and the responsibility real seriously and try and work really hard at it. And, can only hope that effort will allow me to do a reasonable job. So I'm flattered to have been asked to be on, and I really appreciate the time.
Well, Ben, it's been great having you, and I certainly appreciate you taking the time to spend with us here on the X Factor. So how can people contact you?
That's easy. I am Ben at Level Equity is my email, and that's probably the easiest way. I am relatively quick response, so if people want to get in touch, that's the easiest way to do it.
Terrific. All right, well, everybody, that's it for today. We'll look for you next time. Again, I'm Dr. Stephen Long, and this has been the X Factor, the Human Performance and Leadership Podcast. We'll see you next time.